All hardware parts necessary for this train can be found in the endless loop kit. I've also listed all the individual components that are actually used in this assembly. To be more specific, you need exactly 8 M2 screws, at least 1 M3 screw, preferably with the tapered head, and at least 1 magnetic inset ring. Let's begin the assembly. You want to start the print with the main body here. I've designed this in a way that I can print without any supports. This does mean that I have included breakaway supports in the model itself. To better highlight this, I'll pull out a blue reprint that I did, where you can see the tiny little breakaway supports printed in the battery enclosure. Once those have been broken away, it should look more like this. Every other detail in this print was specifically chosen so that way it can print without any supports. The only part in this build that should require supports is the skin itself, and that is because it needs to be printed upside down and has a few extra features that I added support trees to. First off, let's install the pieces for the AAA batteries. The main body, as I mentioned before, break away the supports. The orientation of these pieces is not all that important as long as you replicate that on the battery cap. So I will start by inserting the spring in the bottom, and as you can see, our battery pieces are in and secured. Next up, let's add the battery door here. I printed this in a pink color just to better let it stand out. Take the battery end cap here and insert it in a way that will mirror how you chose to put in the other battery piece. For a note, this is going to be your top piece. This is what's going to insert into the bottom here. So given that I put the spring on the bottom here, I want the spring to be at the top. And I've designed this in a way that you can insert it from either direction. Slide it into place, and that should be just enough to hold it. We'll just go ahead and insert the AAA batteries and take this piece here, insert it into the notch in the bottom of the battery inserts. And you should be able to push and hear a clip sound. Now it is fully secured and won't be going anywhere. Next up, let's install the motor. I've also designed this in a way that you could technically put it in any way that you want, but in order for the train to move forward with the current skin design, make sure that this port is facing the same direction as your wires. Push in, and there are tiny little notches on the side that will help secure the motor, so you may need to give it a tiny bit of force to push into place. Next up, we will take the toggle switch and install it on top. Same thing as before. Choose what you'd like. I make the ports all face the same way. And this is where our first 2 M2 6 screws will come in place. Screw the toggle into place. Next, let's attach the switches, motors, and batteries together. You should have a Y-split wire to allow you to connect these pieces. I'll start by attaching the batteries to the base. And next, I'll attach the motor. Given the orientation of the motor, if you look very closely at this wire, you want those holes to be at the top. Depending on your dexterity or finger size, it may be easier to insert this with a pair of tweezers. And with the switch, we want to follow the opposite rule of having the holes at the bottom orientation when inserting. And then we'll just power it on to see if it works. Looks good. I will note for you, I have damaged my switch, so it is slightly offset. Your switch should not be angled like this. All right, next up, we can just kind of twist this wire up into the compartment here so that way it is nice and secure. And we'll want these 2 wires to come in between the 2 battery connectors. And take the wires, navigate them down, and in between the middle of these 2 connectors. And then just a small twist here should be enough to secure everything. And you may need to bend these battery connectors here slightly. So give them a slight push so that they do not extend beyond the wall of your train. Next up, let's see if the train skin fits correctly. I will give you a fair warning. The train skin itself takes 14 plus hours. If you are testing a fit for the base skin or any designs that you're making, I highly recommend printing in solid color before doing multicolor. And what we're looking for here is the wires are going to pass through here in this little angle. We have a right angle here and a slight 45-degree angle here, allowing the wires a little bit of wiggle room when inserting. So we press these down, insert, and let's see if I can get a good shot of this. The wire should have a small channel to navigate through, preventing it from getting pinched or anything. So we can then slide this over top. I will note that this skin is the thicker skin bed and not the thin skin. There are 2 options where there are more detail in the windows and a thinner wall. So this is the thicker skin. It may be slightly snug. You're going to want to push it down slightly and ensure that clears this toggle switch. Given this will be our first test fit, you may not want to put it all the way down, as it will be difficult to remove to ensure that it is relatively safe. And this prevents anyone, such as children, being able to access the battery compartment, or the wires for that matter. So we're going to push it most of the way, but not all the way down, because the next step is going to be assembling the tires. You should have 4 tires, but they are not all identical. You have 2 copies of each tire mirrored over, so that way when we install the coupling rod, they will be in time as opposed to offset. Next up, one of your plates was labeled TPU. These are going to be all of your TPU materials required to make this run smoothly. You'll print 2 60-teeth timing gears out of TPU and 4 tire rings. To install the tire rings, I recommend looking very closely at your tire rings and taking the piece that was attached to the bed and installing it towards the gear portion of the tire. That is because with the wall mode that I enabled, the top piece will be a bit thinner than the piece that was attached to the bed. So all you do is slide it on top and over, and it should fit perfectly into that groove. And repeat that for the remaining 3 tires. One thing to note, these also have little extra grooves in the top to match up with the tires themselves, so that way they do not slip. So if you install it a little sideways, just give the TPU a little rotation and they should lock into place. And with that, our tires are done. And we'll need to ensure that these TPU timing belts are installed when we install the tires. The first place we'll start is installing on the motor. You'll notice that all of the tires have the same cutout in the circle. This notifies where to place your tires. You'll need to ensure that the tires going on one side are the exact same and not mirrored of the tire you just installed. And you'll also need the teeny tiny little axle that comes with the print to make sure that the tires fit. It may be easiest for you to install the axle directly into the first wheel that you have. One note, because of the orientation that I printed this axle in order to ensure that it was nice and round, it is liable to break off if you are not careful with it when removing the wheel. So just be gentle when removing your wheels, or reprint the teeny tiny little axle. If I get enough requests, I will make a new orientation for the axle, so that way it can actually print in a much more strong orientation. So what is incredibly important here is that when you install the wheels, you remember to install the timing belt. This can be slid around the front tire if you've already installed it, and you want to make sure that grabs onto the gears. It should do that by itself really, but just something to check. And then we'll go and take this tire and slide it into the timing belt, and then insert it into the hole. Next up, we need to be sure that these holes are exactly aligned in the same orientation. You can rotate it slightly. The belt is not too tight that it won't allow it to rotate. That is what this little nub here is for. Once you've aligned it, you can then take this timing belt and slide it over this nub. This adds significantly more tension to the belt and prevents slippage, which is incredibly important for when we install the coupling rod. Repeat on the other side. Next up, we'll install the coupling rod and the, can't remember this word, but the extra steam rod attachment. You should have 2 coupling rods and 2 steam engine attachments. It may be easier for you to attach the steam engine attachments to the coupling rod directly before installing on the wheels. So we'll go about doing it that way. Take this steam engine rod, as you can note by the little nub here, and take your coupling rod and point these little extrusions downwards, so that way you are installing into the flat face. And you'll want to install on the middle portion of the coupling rod. Take one of your M2 screws, insert and screw in. You want to be careful not to over tighten these screws, otherwise the rods will not swing properly. One thing you can do is screw it all the way down until it gets tight, and then give it a small quarter or half turn to loosen. And then we want the rod to be able to dangle and swing as freely as possible while still being secure. Next, when installing on the wheels, to make it easier, you can screw down one portion of the coupling rod first. Again, using M2 screws on this, and we want to make sure that this can rotate freely without loosening the screw. Same measure as before, you can tighten it all the way down and give it a half or quarter turn to loosen. And before doing this second screw, you're going to want to make sure that the steam engine rod is inserted before securing. Now that we're attached, we can insert the last screw. Train one more time. You'll notice that this tire is a little bit wonky right now, and that is because we only have the one coupling rod in. If you choose to do this without the coupling rods, the tire should work just fine. It'll be pulled by the timing belt here, but if you install the coupling rod, you need both installed. One thing to note, if you chose to not mirror the tires and your coupling rod is not completely aligned, as I have done here, you will get a more wobbly back tire. Simplest way to fix that, if you have installed the tires in a reverse order, is likely you need to switch one of the front tires with the opposite side's back tire. And that is relatively simple to do, even if you have everything screwed in. Just be careful not to snap your rods. They are quite thin. Same thing goes for the axle in here. Give it a very slight tug, and that worked perfectly. You may need to pull up on the shell here, or simply not have it installed in the first place. Nope, that won't work, cut that. If you pull up a little bit, it'll make it easier to remove the front tire or the front wheel. If you're having trouble pulling off the wheel, I recommend getting a piece of whatever flat item you have and giving it a small bit of leverage, and that makes it significantly easier to remove. And with that, we should have a perfect mirror of the orientation of the wheel on the other side. Then you'll probably want to attach the magnetic back piece so that way it can be actually used with other Brio train type toys. When installing the magnet and screw, I think that's usually easiest to attach the magnet all the way to the screw head and simply begin screwing into this piece. I will make a note, I am using the screws that came with these magnets, but I have designed this to work with generic M3 screws. The important part is really that you ensure that the M3 has this head type. That way it can sit nicely inside of the magnet. You can use the rounded M3 screws if you'd like, but I find that this works quite well with existing wooden train types. We'll just insert the screw. Typically, when you screw this into the piece, it will give you enough force to set the magnet itself. And now you should have a decent magnetic piece to attach to other train. The design of this skin prevents the front piece from being utilized, but it is there if you wish to print a second piece to redesign the skin. All you have to do is do a simple press fit here, and now it should be able to rotate and work around corners. Then finally, we will want to install the smokestack. That is going to go right over top of the switch you have here. If you've been working with the shell slightly elevated to make the wheels easier to assemble, go ahead and give that a push down, and now you should have a good portion of the switch exposed. That is going to be covered up by the smokestack, so we will go ahead and click that into place. And as a note, as I mentioned before, I have damaged my switch, so it's a little wobbly, but yours, when pressed down, should function just fine. Thank you so much for watching the video all the way through. If you enjoyed what you saw and you want to see more fun 3D print builds, please be sure to subscribe and hit that like on the video. It'll really help me out. We've got some very exciting projects coming down the line, so I hope to see you in the next one. Bye-bye.